In the early hours of December 7th, 1941, the calm sky over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was shattered by the roar of fighter planes and the deafening sound of explosions. It was a day that would forever change the course of history for the United States and the world. As the sun rose over the Pacific, few could have predicted the gravity of what was about to unfold. The attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Navy thrust the United States into the heart of World War II. Before that day, many Americans still clung to the hope of staying out of the global conflict that had already been raging for over 2 years. But the attack, which claimed more than 2,400 American lives and destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet, shattered that illusion. The attack. It was a Sunday morning, and most of the soldiers at Pearl Harbor were either sleeping or engaged in light duties. The base, which was home to the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was unprepared for the onslaught that came in waves. More than 350 Japanese aircraft, including bombers and fighters, swooped down on the unsuspecting American ships and airfields. In a span of just 2 hours, 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 destroyers were either sunk or heavily damaged. More than 188 U.S. aircraft were destroyed, and countless others were left inoperable. The surprise attack left the American military reeling, but it also marked the end of the country's neutrality. Among the soldiers caught in the chaos was Sergeant Tom Anderson, a young man from Ohio who had joined the U.S. Army Air Corps to serve his country. He was stationed at Hickam Field, one of the key airfields at Pearl Harbor, when the attack began. Tom had been asleep in his barracks when the first wave of bombers struck. The deafening sound of explosions jolted him awake. "Get up, Tom. They're bombing us," his roommate, Private Harry Bennett, yelled as he shook him awake. Tom could hear the distant roar of planes and the crackling of gunfire. His heart raced. Without a second thought, Tom grabbed his uniform and rushed out into the chaos. The sky was filled with the dark smoke from burning ships and the flashing streaks of anti-aircraft fire. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, some trying to launch planes while others manned their posts, firing back at the attackers. But the Japanese had the advantage of surprise, and the U.S. forces were caught off guard. Tom found himself running to a hangar where a few of his comrades were trying to ready planes for combat. The sight was surreal, men shouting orders, the roar of engines starting up, and the loud explosions that echoed all around them. Tom climbed into one of the planes, an old B-17 Flying Fortress, and helped load ammunition into its belly. He knew the odds were slim, but he had no choice. The fight had come to him. As he climbed into the cockpit and prepared for takeoff, Tom looked around at the destruction. A battleship, the USS Arizona, was burning just offshore, the flames licking the sky. The loss was unimaginable, but Tom's training kicked in. He had to focus. The hours following the attack were a blur of confusion and chaos. As the Japanese planes retreated, Tom and the surviving airmen scrambled to mount a counterattack. But the damage had been done. Pearl Harbor was a graveyard of ships and planes. Tom's best friend, Harry, had been killed in the attack, and many others he knew were either wounded or lost. Despite the devastation, there was a sense of resolve among the survivors. This was just the beginning. The United States would not sit idly by. America's response. The attack on Pearl Harbor united the American people in a way few other events could. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation on December 8, 1941, calling it a date which will live in infamy. Within hours, Congress declared war on Japan. A few days later, Nazi Germany, allied with Japan, declared war on the United States, drawing the country into the European theater of the conflict as well. For Tom Anderson, the war had become personal. He was soon reassigned to a squadron that would be sent to the Pacific to engage the Japanese forces directly. The next few years would test his endurance, his courage, and his very humanity. The Battle of Midway. In June of 1942, less than 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Tom found himself in the middle of the Battle of Midway, one of the most significant naval battles of World War II. The Japanese, intent on further expanding their empire in the Pacific, sought to capture the island of Midway, which was strategically vital to the U.S. defense. But the United States, having broken Japanese codes, knew of the planned attack and prepared to meet it head-on. Tom's squadron was part of the air support for the battle, and as they took to the skies, he could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. The Japanese forces, although larger and better equipped, were not prepared for the intelligence advantage the U.S. had gained. The battle turned into a decisive victory for the Americans, who managed to sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers while losing only one of their own. Tom's squadron played a critical role in the success of the battle, launching torpedo runs and bombing runs that crippled the Japanese fleet. It was a bittersweet victory, as many men didn't return, including some of Tom's closest friends. But the tide of war had turned, and the United States was now on the offensive. The war's toll. As the war continued, Tom witnessed the horrors of combat up close. He fought in numerous battles, including the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. With each victory came more loss. The once idealistic young man from Ohio had seen death in many forms: explosions, gunfire, and the ravages of war that tore apart not only the body, but the spirit. By the time the war ended in 1945, with the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Tom had been forever changed. He returned home a hero, but the weight of what he had witnessed haunted him. The war had taken a toll on his body and mind, and like many other veterans, he struggled to adjust to life in peacetime. The legacy. The United States emerged from World War II as a global superpower, its economy and military strengthened by the years of conflict. For Tom and millions of others who fought in the war, it was a defining experience. The world had been reshaped, and the scars of war ran deep. Yet, the resilience of the American people, their commitment to freedom, and the sacrifices of those like Tom Anderson ensured that the values of democracy would prevail. As Tom stood at the gravesite of his fallen comrades many years later, he reflected on the price of peace. War had taken so much, yet it had also forged a new beginning for the world. The echo of that war would remain for generations, but the lessons it taught would guide the future.